Welcome to Research into the Classroom, and today we are joined by Lauren Grocott, who's the Content and Engagement Specialist at the EEF for Early Years, and we have Fliss James from ShREC Nursery School and also Director of the East London Research School as well. So thank you very much for both joining us.
Thank you, lovely to be here.
This is new for us because we've never done it on video before, so it's going to be a learning curve the whole way through, but I'm excited. So today we're going to be discussing high quality interactions in the early years setting. So why are high quality interactions so important in the early years setting? Lauren, do you want to start us off?
Yes, please, I would love to. Essentially, particularly when we're thinking about how best to support our socioeconomically disadvantaged children. There's evidence that tells us that high quality early education and care is good for all children. I don't think anyone would argue with that, but it is disproportionately beneficial for socioeconomically disadvantaged children, which means that the quality of our practice, our day-to-day interactions with children is a really powerful tool for helping to make a difference for those children. And high quality interactions essentially underpin all other areas of early years practice. So the way that we've described high quality interactions in our guidance is a combination of, there's two very well evidenced strategies that sit at the heart of those interactions, which can be used in your everyday interactions with children on a day-to-day basis. So the first of those is developing those back and forth conversations with children. And I know that we'll be talking about that lots with Fliss, which I am always really excited to hear. And then the other strategy is around scaffolding children's thinking and learning. I think they're two things that we might hear about quite a lot and can often look relatively simple or straightforward to do. It's happened to me more often and more recently than I would care to admit that I have reflected and thought, why did I do that? Why did I say that? I've completely derailed, or lots of the children have just left because I've come in a bit too excited. So I think they're quite tricky to get right, but an investment of time and energy into doing that should have a positive impact on the overall quality of your provision. And we know from evidence that that is time well invested for supporting our socioeconomically disadvantaged children. So I think the importance of focusing on children's communication and language skills can't really be understated, and how those things should be prioritised in early years because they underpin children's thinking and children's learn across all other areas. And Fliss, we often talk about the power of those interactions for building children's brains, don't we? And we get very excited.
Yes, we absolutely do. Just building on what Lauren has said, it's just so vital to really understand the research evidence underpinning this. It's really, really exciting. We know that, the research evidence that has been carried out over decades, really does demonstrate that high quality interactions really do matter. And I think it's really worth thinking a bit about what we mean by that in terms of responsive, socially meaningful back and forth conversations. And that's very much what underpins the ShREC approach. But that idea that these really powerful interactions that are attuned and grounded in the relationship between children and adults are the cornerstone of that educational quality. So if we can really get that right, the impact of that potentially is transformational. And I think, it's as Lauren said, we get really overexcited about all the neuroscience, because one of the things that we want to share with early years educators and everybody really, I guess, see it as a bit of a public health message, is that idea around the early years laying the foundations for a child's future success in learning and in life. And that actually, that rapid growth of learning is immense in those first 5 years. And that early impact really does last for a lifetime. And so all that evidence around a really powerful developmental process known as serve and return is something that really is at the heart of this. And serve and return relationships, the interactions that happen from infancy with children and caregivers, but actually that mechanism of that back and forth interaction is really, really key. And what's exciting about that is that that really does build children's brains. It shapes brain architecture and has this really powerful sort of impact on the language centers in the brain as well. So that's really exciting. So for us to communicate to educators that by investing time and effort and learning about how to have these amazing interactions, you're building children's brains, like that's really exciting. I think it's something that we want to harness and kind of share and shout from the rooftops. But as Lauren said, to kind of really know what that looks like is actually quite complex and actually quite challenging. And I think one of the things that is highlighted in the Education Endowment Foundation's guidance report, Preparing for Literacy, is this idea that actually we need to, sounds really obvious, but we need to talk with children and not just to or at them. So that idea of things being kind of contingent and responsive is really, really important, because often what we will see in early childhood education and care settings is a lot of procedural talk. So kind of getting through the routines and going through the motions of the day, and educators and professionals not necessarily realizing all these wonderful opportunities there are to have these socially meaningful conversations. So what I mean by procedural talk is that sort of language around directions and instructions. Come on, get your coat. Right now it's time to sit down. It's snack time. Can you stop fighting? Can you do X? Can you do Y? And it's not actually grounded in children's interests. And that's what we've really tried to kind of hone in on when thinking about how you qualify, how you codify having these all-important brain-building back and forth interactions that really lay those foundations.
So I can see already why you're so excited about this. Like, you've got me on board straight away. So the ShREC approach, like, what is it for those who are coming in completely cold on this?
Yeah, so the ShREC approach, it's really exciting. It kind of started here at Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre from a project that we developed back in 2018, which was called Manor Park Talks. And the aim of that project was really looking at how to improve children's communication and language, but thinking about the interactions between educators and children, but 2-year-olds. So it was linked to the increase in 2-year-old provision. And we really wanted to kind of look at the research evidence and think about what are the most effective ways to support children's communication and language. How do we lay those foundations? So we had this really exciting opportunity to do this project, which was funded by the Education Endowment Foundation. As part of that, that meant that there was an independent evaluation carried out. So that meant that then we had this brilliant opportunity to kind of really see what worked, what needed to be developed. So as part of this project, the other thing that happened was that we worked with 2 academics from UCL in London, and they wrote an effective strategies review of the most effective strategies, most effective pedagogical strategies for children aged 2 to 5. So that really gave us this amazing kind of opportunity to kind of look at that body of research and kind of distill it, because as we all know, it's really important to think about how do we translate these all important messages so that they are actually actionable, so we can have something that we can put into practice on the ground in our day-to-day lives with children. So as a recommendation of the independent evaluation was to scale up the project. So we scaled that up. So Melissa, who's unfortunately not here to join me today, she and I worked really hard on scaling up that project across Newham local authority. So that meant that we had this opportunity to iterate. And as part of that, one of the things that happened was that we essentially kind of came up with this acronym, ShREC. And it was that idea of really taking the themes from the Manor Park Talks review and kind of finding a way to kind of make sure that they were as accessible and memorable as possible, to kind of help sort of walk people into the complexity of this, because it's all very well to kind of say, yeah, we want high quality interactions, we want to increase conversations. And as you know, I've already said, it looks easier than it is. And so for giving people a way in is really, really critical. And so it's that idea of kind of giving practical advice, something tangible on how to implement the conversations. So the acronym is 4 strategies, essentially, and it's an overall approach. The first strategy is share attention. Second is respond. Third is expand. And 4th is conversation. And we kind of really thought very carefully about how to communicate this. So we wanted to exemplify it through video, but also find ways in which we could communicate this effectively. So one of the ways in which really helped kind of disseminating the ShREC approach and developing it was when I was working with Education Endowment Foundation as a content specialist for early years, and was able to kind of have a campaign to really highlight the importance of high quality interactions and kind of use the ShREC approach as a sort of a springboard for this discussion and the work that has then kind of come up from it. So it's a really useful starting point. It really is powerful, and we've seen quite significant impact, if that's not too much of a stretch, in terms of how people have responded to the approach, how people have wanted to really develop their skills. And what educators notice when they really kind of take time to really kind of try the strategies and start to kind of take a step back, slow down, and realize that they have been engaging in much more procedural talk and far fewer of those beautiful kind of lovely responsive meaningful interactions that capture children's interest, but actually give this amazing opportunity for educators to really stretch their language, to really give them the skills that they need.
So you've explained that codifying was really important to get people kind of on board with this, is it?
It's one of those things that actually on one level feels quite intuitive and natural, but equally can be so easily derailed. And I think also that when you start to kind of stop and try and think about your interactions, actually for some educators that can mean that they end up doing less or really kind of go in too quickly with trying to kind of ask long questions or even closed questions. So actually this was the point, was that we really wanted to find a way to give early years educators these memorable steps. So share attention is really, really critical. And I think that one of the things that we've learned a lot about this particular strategy is that it's like the essential prerequisite. So what it means is actually making sure first and foremost that actually you're at the child's level. So this whole idea of establishing joint attention, joint engagement in something that the child is interested in. So it sounds really obvious, but many adults will still kind of approach children to engage with them and be kind of looming over them, standing up. And actually, if we think about what that means for a young child, actually that's really kind of daunting, and it doesn't necessarily make the child feel like you are in that moment with them, you know, interested. So you've got to kind of be at the child's level. And we actually talk about how that might be, you might be sitting with a child, you might be lying on your belly on a very dusty sand decking or outside or on the grass. So it's that whole idea of meeting the child where they're at and really kind of paying attention to what they are interested in. And that's what's really crucial. We're trying to find that shared engagement, that shared attention. So it's not about the adult's agenda. It's really, really key. But what's really vital about this is that once you've kind of established that rapport, the child is really kind of like knows that you're there, that you're ready and willing and able to actually engage with them, then you need to respond, and you need to respond in a way that's going to be very contingent. So based on the child's interest, and really critically, really thinking about following the child's lead. And that's really challenging because as adults, especially when we're in an educator role, we want to teach, we want to guide, we want to move children on. And that is really important, but actually responding in a way that follows the child's lead, from what we know from the research evidence, is really key in terms of increasing children's linguistic productivity. The children will talk more if you are sharing attention with them and attuned to them, and that you respond to them following their particular interest.
It is so intuitive, like you respond in a conversation, but there's really getting this right. What would that stage look like?
Yeah, so really getting that right is about making sure that you are really focusing on commenting. It's such a powerful strategy. So literally saying or labeling what you see. I mean, we talk about kind of responding to verbal and non-verbal kind of communication from the child, those signals that they give you, but by making a brief comment. So literally giving the child the words to connect to that thing that they're focused on. And depending on your knowledge of the child and the stage of their development, that will help you kind of gauge, how many words you might use or the length of a sentence. But the key thing is that we're not racing in with like a closed question or an open question that can derail and stop the flow of interaction. The whole aim is that the response needs to be matching what the child's interested in. You follow their lead, you give them the language that they need to really help them in terms of giving them the words that they need for what they can see, hear, feel, whatever they're experiencing. We sometimes make an assumption that children know words for things that they're engaging with. Like when an adult goes, "What colour is it?" the child might not actually know. So not only is that quite a stressful kind of way of interacting with children, putting them on, on the spot with a closed question, actually also it means that it's the adult's agenda. It's not necessarily what the child is interested in, and also doesn't take into account what they already know, what words they are currently using. So that's really key. So share attention, respond. But the thing that we want to do once we've kind of got into that, we're starting to get into that back and forth interaction, is we just don't want to leave it there with that response. We want to be able to build, we want to expand on the child's communication language. And so particularly in terms of thinking about the words that they might use. And this can also work in an inclusive way by thinking about actions or sounds or gestures that children might use as well. So we want to make it really clear that we're not just talking about verbal, spoken conversations, but it's about expanding, building on what the child says or what kind of action or movement or noise they might make, and then adding more words, because that's the whole point. We want to enrich, we want to scaffold, we want to model rich language. So we're giving children all of this sort of richest package that we can. And the whole beauty of these back and forth conversations is what we're trying to achieve, is that children are getting immediate feedback right then and there in that moment, focused on the thing that they're interested in. What the adult is doing is they're dropping in and weaving in these all-important words and sentences and concepts that are going to feed the child's language and extend their thinking. So what we're aiming for is this sustained back and forth conversation. And we want that to be extended as much as possible. But a really key thing to remember is that actually we need to make sure through all of this that we are giving children time to listen, to process and reply. And that's really, really key, because we can really go in too fast. And actually, it's really critical for children's communication and language and their thinking that they are given powerful pauses so that they can actually share with us what they know, and that we are taking that sensitive approach to engaging with the children. It's a form of co-construction. And I think this idea that we're flipping what interactions look like, it's not about just giving children lots of words. It's not about just kind of pouring information into their brains. And that's what's so exciting, is that the research that we've drawn on is really, it's developing all the time, but there's been a big shift in this idea of thinking about word gaps and sort of increasing words, but thinking about quality as well. And that these multi-turn conversations between children and adults are having this impact on children's brains. So those 4 strategies really enable educators to have something to work through and to keep those interactions going, to really support them to prioritize the development of children's communication language. And a key thing about the ShREC approach is that it's relational. Because you're attuning to the child, you're also supporting and attending to their emotional well-being. And again, the research evidence shows that if we attend to children's emotional well-being, that in turn really does support and promote more language. Children will talk more because they know that the person that they're with is interested. So those are the 4 strategies. It is an approach, that's how we describe it, because we want to make sure that people don't kind of separate it out too much into stages or sections, or that can be a little bit of a a challenge, and we also want to make sure that people don't perceive it as an intervention. So there's no such thing as ShREC time, and you wouldn't be taking children out of their continuous provision, their learning environment, to go and just have like these kind of conversations. We want to embed it. We want to make sure that every interaction counts, and that educators are shifting their behavior. They're becoming more attuned. They're realizing this idea of talking with children, not just at or to them, and really thinking about how do they kind of really pay close attention so they can really match where the child is at, and then scaffold and extend their thinking and learning.
And I think the way I love hearing Fliss and Melissa and the team talking about that, because I think it shows, once you sort of listen and you break down kind of what might be happening and what the educator might be doing during sort of each part of that interaction, you can start to envision how inclusive that actually is, or the power of how inclusive that can be when we're really sort of tuned in and thinking about that individual child, what's going on for them in that moment. I've had some conversations with colleagues, actually, we also kind of touched on this very recently. People might sort of say, well, if a child's sort of oral language skills are not where you might expect them to be for their age, then how are you meant to do that? And I'd kind of draw them back to sort of unpicking what happens during each. You're starting off where the child is, meeting them where they are, I think, is the best possible way, and thinking about both verbal and non-verbal cues and alternative methods of communication within that, because it's very holistic and it's all about that individual child in that everyday sort of interaction that you're having with them.
It's that idea of ensuring that people really think about what constitutes conversation, and that it can initially prompt people to think that they've got to have these very extended verbal contributions, and actually thinking, gosh, particularly if we're thinking about our children who might have speech language communication needs, are multilingual. And so, we're thinking about different aspects of their development, or children who, are coming into our context, who've just had far fewer experiences, really need those nurturing relationships and interactions. And actually, there will be children that you're working with that actually you need to really think so carefully about who they are, what motivates them. But actually, these strategies work for everyone. And I think that's some of the things that we've really learned here at Sheringham, because it's at the core of everything we do here. We have spent a lot of time exemplifying what the ShREC approach looks like for children who are not yet using spoken language, verbal language. And it's been fascinating to really kind of dig into that, really look at what it actually looks like, and then the impact of that. And I think that that's been a really vital part of the work that we have done in our in the current kind of iteration of the original Manor Park Talks project, which is the Early Years Conversation project, which now we're reaching 112 settings in London, working with educators who are working with 2-year-olds and really using the ShREC approach to help support them to change their behavior, to become more responsive, to have more of these meaningful, socially meaningful, responsive conversations. And a really, really key part of that has been very much to focus on how inclusive this is, and what to do when actually a child doesn't necessarily have the language that you might expect them to have, or they might be communicating in different ways. And so that's been really fascinating for us in terms of exemplifying that, of learning from educators, children, settings, but also how we can keep thinking about how we communicate the research evidence, the strategies, and what the professional development looks like to effectively support educators to implement this in whatever context they're in with all of their children. And that's been really fascinating.
Just picking up on that point around children who haven't perhaps got that language which you would expect them to have, what have you got within your exemplification of best approaches for those children?
Well, what we've really focused on is using the 4 strategies of the ShREC approach and exemplifying that by using video. Really kind of our educators here at Sheringham are incredibly skilled, and they've been practicing and rehearsing these strategies for a number of years now. So they really understand understand the importance of it and that relational pedagogy of really knowing who those children are. So they really know how to kind of hone in and share attention with that child. And I think when we're thinking about that idea of serve and return and establishing that back and forth interaction, one of the things that's really, really important is that the adult is really noticing what are those kind of serves. If we think of it like a game of tennis or ping pong, how is that child communicating their message to you, their intent to engage? And that requires you to really notice really subtle and sometimes fleeting cues that show intent to communicate. So it might be a vocalization, it might be a widening of the eyes, it might be a gesture or some kind of physical kind of signal that I want to play with you, I want to interact. And it can also, and this is something we've learned a lot about, take the form of, and I'm doing sort of air quotes, behavior, but behaviors that feel and can be somewhat, for want of a better word, negative. So a child pulling your hair or throwing something, that's a serve. That's a, I want to communicate with you. And actually, I might not yet have the words to do this, but I'm using different things, different cues to draw you in. And it can be so tempting and for an educator to try and change that, to stop it, to not acknowledge that as a valid, valuable, important way of interacting with that child. So that's really key, because a lot of those serves, those signals, those cues will be incredibly subtle and fleeting. So we've kind of got to train ourselves to really, like, you know, share attention, pick up on all those cues so that we can respond in meaningful ways, so that we can then expand on what that vocalization might be, what that particular action that the child is engaging in, label it, give it some words, not expect that the child will respond verbally, but still have that high expectation that you can engage with them in a meaningful way to extend their communication and ultimately engage in that back and forth, playful, sustained interaction.
So I think you've touched on this already, but how do we mobilise staff around this and get them on board with this way of thinking and this approach?
This is absolutely vital. I mean, what we know is that the extent of professional development is a crucial determinant of the overall impact on young children's communication and language development. So we know that that really, really matters. I think one of the things that we've really, really kind of found out more about is the depth to which people want to do this, but sometimes will think, but it's just chatting, I do that already. So that kind of knowing doing gap can be really apparent. And I think that's one of the things that we've thought a lot about, that it is brilliant, and we're really proud of how we've codified this approach. We're really proud of the impact that we're seeing with it, but we're also crucially aware that actually it's not enough just to have the knowledge of it. We've got to go beyond that. And the Education Endowment Foundation's guidance report into effective professional development has really, really enabled us to think carefully about this, because we've got this graphic, we've got this video, we've got these 4 strategies that are accessible. We know that educators find it sort of acceptable and motivating. You know, it's something that they're like, yeah, this taps into what I want to do as well. But actually that ability to kind of learn those strategies but then enact it is really, really tricky. So it's that going beyond building the knowledge of what the 4 strategies are and knowing it's important. So okay, I know, you know, share attention, respond, expand conversation, cool, I'm good to go. But actually there is that gap, and this is where we've really thought about what the professional development needs to incorporate to shift that behavior change, because that's ultimately what it requires. So thinking about how do we kind of motivate the educators to see this as valuable, but also really thinking about developing their understanding of the strategies, their teaching techniques. And that's where the video exemplification has been absolutely crucial. And we've drawn on other research and other projects that have utilized video reflection. So in terms of really helping educators, we've got to build their knowledge and motivate them, but we've got to make sure that there's this like wraparound support. It has has to be sustained professional development. It can't be just a one-off kind of little session. Here's a ShREC approach, here's a video, off you go. It would be too surface level. And while that's important for awareness raising and the beginning of the journey of building that knowledge, what really is necessary is that commitment to having the professional conversations. So what we have really kind of thought carefully about is a sustained program of professional development that incorporates mentoring, and that actually you exemplify the strategies. So we use videos of really expert educators engaging in it. But what the point of using that video exemplification is actually for the educator who's learning to actually have time to notice the strategies in action. Can they spot them? Can they see that someone in a video is sharing attention? So notice, but then crucially analyze the impact of that on the child. So actually when you respond and you comment, rather than offering a really kind of restrictive closed question, what happens again to the child? What is the impact in that moment? So again, by having that video, the nuances will be really kind of easy, what will be easier for educators to spot, because when you see it happening, wow, it's just happening, isn't it? So the idea that you notice, you analyze, but the key thing really ultimately, and again, this is grounded in the research, other research evidence that's been carried out around looking at the professional development around supporting language supporting practices, is that what you need to then be able to do is, okay, I can spot it, I can look at the impact, but can I then change my behavior? Can I refine what I'm doing in light of having learned this, seen it in action, and gone, right. So when you video yourself, that's really powerful. And if you can have that kind of conversation with another colleague, or even if you can reflect by yourself, that opportunity to stop and really think carefully, almost become metacognitive about why you're doing what you're doing and the impact of it, really helps people to kind of take stock. It's behavior change, it's undoing habits, and it's learning new ways of being. So our early years conversation project actually is 8 months worth of professional development that is broken down into manageable chunks of face-to-face and online content, but crucially this idea of using video reflection to really kind of notice, to really interpret what's going on, analyze it, and then think, right, what am I going to do next? I've been asking way too many questions. Next time I'm going to practice commenting. Next time I'm going to pause. So that has this cumulative ongoing effect. And yeah, from our program and our professional development we've done here at ShREC and more widely, we've seen that in action and seen the impact it can have. It's time consuming and challenging, but absolutely worthwhile beyond anything I think I've ever engaged in professionally. That professional development is really, really key.
And that feels like a bit of a top tip there around videoing and reflect on that practice. What's kind of been the from your point of view, Lauren, in kind of engaging people within this approach?
I think one of the really exciting things about this is that it really seems to have gained traction across the sector, and I've obviously benefited hugely from being able to sort of discuss and reflect and learn from Fliss and Melissa and colleagues at ShREC who were sort of living and breathing this and developing the early years conversation project. But more broadly, I think thinking very sort of practically and pragmatically about strategies that we might use given the potential sort of impact of something like ShREC. It's your investment of your time and energy on a day-to-day basis. You do not have to go and buy lots of different resources. You don't have to have, fancy tech and everything else. It's you and it's that child. And it's the emphasis on it being an everyday. It's not easy. You've heard that it's not easy. It's much more complex than that. And absolutely professional development sustained over a period of time, coaching, mentoring, those other mechanisms are crucially important. So that kind of the investment piece, but in terms of sort of, I think, removing the barriers to getting going for settings who, people's budgets are stretched really tight, and people often sort of say to me, our timetable, if they're in a reception class, for example, our timetable's so packed. well, actually, the research evidence is very supportive of the prioritisation of children's communication and language. And this is a strategy. Once you've learned how to do it and you're honing your practice and reflecting and making that behaviour change, there's not any other sort of prep that you need to do in the background beyond really thinking about that child and that moment that you're in. So I think that that's something that's very sort of appealing. It feels feasible to do, and it's backed by so much evidence. Again, not easy, but I think really, really worth the investment of time, energy, and effort to develop high quality interactions, high quality practice, providing sort of the best possible start for all children, but particularly our socioeconomically disadvantaged children.
And I think to add to that, one of the things that we've found that has been a really key part of the work that we've done to date is using books and the idea of interactive reading as a vehicle for practicing the ShREC approach. So actually, when you're thinking about how do I do it, in my packed timetable, or how am I going to, you want to change everything, don't you? And actually, we found that thinking about using books as your way in has been enormously powerful, because what we're doing is we're using that as a hook for the adult. It really helps them kind of attune to the child. I think that adults who are really competent at having beautiful kind of back and forth conversations with children will find all those wonderful, meaningful moments, no matter what, whether it's snack time, nappy changes, in play, indoors, outdoors, and even in more kind of adult guided teaching experiences. But actually, for someone who may be new, someone who may be feeling less confident, and also if you've got really tricky constraints around your timetable, well, actually, that's one way, using a book to practice ShREC. So using those 4 strategies to engage in that conversation is really powerful, because the sharing of a book kind of offers that unparalleled kind of opportunity to be quite close to the child, to really kind of hear what they want, what they're interested in, notice. You can really kind of share attention well, because actually you can spot what they're looking at, what they might be pointing at, what they're interested in. If they're lingering over a beautiful illustration, then that gives you something to really help support that interaction. So it's a really key kind of, a key mechanism, key vehicle through which we're helping educators to use to really develop that. And what our kind of theory is that if you do use a book in this way, that it will kind of leak out. You'll get this kind of radiating out of practice. So that's something that we've kind of been really thinking about, and is a kind of a central part of the work that we do here with our educators as well. So that idea of really thinking about how do you engage people in using the approach, that really practical kind of practice of using books. Educators love using books, and it's a really meaningful way to develop children's communication and literacy as well, but also allows you to kind of compartmentalize it, for want of a better word, if you are having a really tricky time to think about making these changes to those interactions throughout your practice.
When I've spoken to people, there's this idea that this is for EYFS teachers, and then it stops. And listening to you, that's got to be a misconception. So, how does this work across school?
I think that's a brilliant question, and something that I think is really important to touch on, because we don't want this to kind of fall off a cliff edge. I mean, when children are entering into Key Stage 1, they're still 5. And I think you're absolutely right that we need to think about this beyond the early years foundation stage. Interestingly, some of the research that underpins the serve and return kind of mechanism of conversation, and actually a really exciting piece of research called Beyond the 30 Million Word Gap, looked at children who were 4, 5 and 6. So actually those are children who are moving beyond, the early years foundation stage in our context in England. So I would say absolutely finding ways to weave that in would be really powerful. I think obviously the challenges are going to be related to other constraints in terms of the curriculum and the structure of the day and so forth. But actually, if we're thinking about reducing procedural talk and increasing opportunities for socially meaningful conversations, I would argue again that that's really important, that it connects to thinking about oracy. It's this continual prioritization of the development of children's communication and language. So I think, yes, although we've really honed in on early years, and the exemplification currently is focused on, sort of the early years foundation stage children from birth to 5, absolutely, I would be a massive advocate of thinking about how could we take this and how could we implement it in those other key phases. Interestingly, I had conversations with secondary school leaders and teachers as part of some partnership work in Brighton and Hove and with Durrington Research School. And these secondary leaders and teachers wanted to hear all about this and what it meant for children and understanding where children come from and actually where kind of those challenges around, conversation, communication, language, challenges that underpin kind of challenges in literacy going forward, were really interested in this and thinking of the ways in which they could incorporate back and forth conversations in meaningful ways in those contexts. So yes, short answer, I think we do need to think about it. It's really careful, but I'm very mindful of the context and thinking about the constraints. But yeah, absolutely.
I think as well an important point to bear in mind, particularly thinking about sort of what's happening in primary, is that developmentally something like having those back and forth conversations is still probably going to be sort of super beneficial for just because they've turned 5, just because they've turned 6, sort of chronologically, developmentally, that might, it might not necessarily be the case. So as Fliss said, I think avoiding that sort of cliff edge. And we know that ShREC can be a vehicle for sharing, like using interactive reading, for example, the ShREC approach through sort of interactive reading. When you're extending children's communication language, you can be quite ambitious with the vocabulary, for example, that you choose to introduce. So I think there's some really interesting threads there. Definitely thinking about sort of the context that it's being used in, but I think there's some really interesting threads there that, are definitely sort of worth thinking about.
I imagine people will be hooked already. What are your experiences of the successes of this?
Yeah, I mean, as Lauren said, I mean, one of the things that we've been amazed at is the traction, how far and wide it has gone. We have had fascinating kind of conversations and little case studies from, international contexts. We get asked quite a lot, to contribute to conferences all over the country around this, because there's something really, it's tapping into something that feels right about the way in which we should be interacting with children and prioritizing children's communication language. That relational, intentional pedagogy is absolutely vital. And it's something that's really kind of sparked a bit of joy. And that's what we hear, that people sort of say, wow, actually, and because the research evidence is so strong underpinning it, it's that idea that actually, you can get that real sort of support from senior leaders, from people who might not necessarily know much about the early years and the development that is, there's not another time in our human existence in which the brain is developing more rapidly. So actually, yeah, we can't not focus on it. So I think it's about really kind of continuing to kind of share the messages, finding those really kind of practical, accessible ways to communicate this, and supporting people to think about the implementation, as Lauren was saying, in their context. But yeah, the underlying message, the underlying kind of moral imperative, we know that what happens early matters for a lifetime. So in my mind, there's nothing more worthy of investing in.
In terms of like those lethal mutation, you mentioned a few earlier around the approach. So do you want to just elaborate on a few of those?
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, there haven't been too many, which has been wonderful to see. But yeah, you do have to kind of sort of adjust, make it clear that it's not seen as, like a separate thing, like that idea of having ShREC time. I mean, you have to kind of be really clear about the nature of it, the inclusivity of it, the fact that actually this is about, we call it a way of being, it's changing how you interact and reframing what constitutes teaching in the early years, because that's what it is, and that's something that not only gives it that credibility but enables us to really think about it carefully. But yeah, I think that's something that's really important, that it's not seen as something that, right, I'm going to go and take my group of children to go and do ShREC time. That's not what we're talking about. We want it to, we're ambitious. We want it to be embedded into everything, and to find ways in which to really think about how do we kind of make sure we are talking with children, that we're listening to children, we're having conversations with them, we're using this as this powerful approach to change behavior. And so really supporting everybody to understand that. And I think just to reiterate the fact that it is inclusive, fully inclusive, that we've seen really fascinating examples of beautiful high quality interactions with children who are communicating, non-verbally, but also in different ways as well. And just one last thing to say about traction and where it's reached. We actually had someone reach out to us who said they have been using ShREC with adults that they work with who have dementia, and actually the relational kind of element of it has really kind of, there's something about that has really kind of made it powerful for adults as well. So we see it as being applicable all over. But really thinking about that it's for everyone, that you can use and should use the ShREC approach in other languages as well. That's a really key thing to remember, that it's appropriate to, it's not just about using English, it's about all language, and thinking about other modalities as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I've sort of noticed when I speak to people is maybe the challenge in stepping away from your agenda as an adult, and as Fliss said, sort of that shift away from, we as educators, we as teachers, feeling that we must sort of impart all of this knowledge, and actually we're doing so much for children's learning, thinking and development by engaging with them in these interactions, that can be and should be our only agenda in that moment, rather than I want them to talk about this thing, or I'm going to try and sort of pivot that way. That is not what this is about. And the research is very supportive of it being implemented as Fliss has described.
As you've been talking, I've really heard it clear that this is not easy to do. It's a hard thing. The way it's packaged up is it appears, oh, that's really simple. Like, that's really easy to do. And I wonder is that something which is kind of not a downfall of it at all, but is that something which is one of the challenges when you're trying to engage people with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it can be one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, okay, let's have some conversations. Oh, 4 steps. Yeah, that's dead easy. It's really simple. But this is like the top level view. What you see from that graphic is the top level view, and actually what's under each of those strategies and the bigger kind of picture, it's like the iceberg, then it really is. And I think there can be a moment where people kind of go, I really need to think about this. Yeah, it's important for raising awareness, building knowledge, and really kind of getting those messages out there. But we have to walk people into the complexity of it. It is something that requires that careful, thoughtful implementation and professional development to really help people change their behaviour.
I think it's presented in such a way that it doesn't feel like an insurmountable challenge when you sort of look at that graphic and think, right, okay. And then, as Fliss said, there's just that sort of drip feed of there's a bit more to it than that. There's a bit more. It's going to take some time, but time well spent.
So what we tend to do at the end of our podcast is we talk about work which is currently going on, and then also some signposting if people want to kind of go away and look at some of these things in more detail.
If I can start us off, and then we'll make sure that we flag the very exciting new thing. So we, on the EEF website, within our early years resources, we have a page dedicated to this called Improving Early Education Through High Quality Interaction. So that's where we sort of summarise the back and forth conversations using the ShREC approach, and also scaffolding as well. So there's a video of the ShREC approach, which was captured at Sheringham quite a while ago now, I think. So that's all sort of, we've tried to house it in one place, and that's kind of our key resource, but there are some links in there to places like the Early Years Evidence Store as a link. and the poster is housed there and everything else. But Fliss has got something very exciting and new as well to share and to add, I think, to the list.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're really, really excited. So Melissa and I, along with Dr. Julian Grenier, Professor Lynn Ang and Dr. Sinead Harmy from UCL, we've been able to write a paper about the ShREC approach, and that was published just over a week ago. And it's really exciting, our first peer-reviewed journal paper, and that we can share that. We're really lucky it's open access, so we can share that link for listeners. But it's really exciting because it's just, again, really highlighting the importance of how we support educators. You know, it's all about that professional development to enhance high quality conversational interactions in our early childhood education and care settings using this approach. So yeah, we're really excited to share that. And if people aren't aware of it, there is a really accessible kind of poster that's a little bit sort of more detailed than the EEF graphic that we've developed as our projects have iterated. So we can share that for people to download, which is on our Stronger Practice Hub.
Well done, and congratulations on that work. And I'm not surprised, because your passion and your knowledge around this, both of you, is really impressive and infectious as well. So thank you very much for joining us today to speak with me. I've learned so much, and I can't wait to go and share this, not just with our EYFS practitioners, but with everybody.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.